Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Fridays with Keenan's Cutting Edge. My name is Jenna Labor, and I will be your host as we explore the dynamic world of Don Keenan's trial philosophy, The Cutting Edge. Today, we have Elizabeth Larrick back with us to talk about taking our witness prep to the next level. Now, we all know Elizabeth. She needs no introduction. She is KTI's resident witness preparation guru. She teaches, she travels, she helps people with jury selection and getting their clients ready to testify both for deposition and trial. So Elizabeth, we've heard from you before, and you gave us a great foundation about what to do to help with witness prep. What else do you have for us? How can we level up?
Well, Jenna, thank you so much for having me back. I enjoyed our time together last time, and I know we're going to have another great episode together. So thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Glad to have you back. All right. So what's new? What's different? What else can we do besides, stuff that we kind of already know?
I know. And so I was thinking like, okay, well, what do I have to offer, and what have I found? And that's pretty much kind of where it came from, is like, okay, like been doing this for a couple of years now, almost 10. And wow. Like what hundreds of witnesses, couple hours. So what can we do? And what have I been doing to basically, like you said, to bring it to the next level? Like, what's the next extension? And some of the things we're going to talk about, I know people are trying and they may be dabbling with it, and that's awesome. And I know, like you said, like thinking about things witness prep wise, like always knowing that our foundation is going to be our 7 steps through that template. And so if we're doing that right, and we're getting success, like keep doing that. Like that's the way to go. If there's anything in Edge that we have been doing consistently, it is that 7-step method. It's not changing because guess what? It works. So how can we level up? And so I have kind of 3 different things, some things that I've been trying, some things I've been doing for a while. And I know, Jenna, you've probably been doing these too, so we'll be able to chit chat about it. And the first one was incorporating focus groups into your witness prep system. So have you been using focus groups for witness prep?
I would say the limited time I've done that is when I have tested out some element of my client, maybe with a blink focus group or something like that. And there's a little bit of feedback. Maybe they have a certain tick or something that they do, then I might share that with them as a little bit of feedback. But I always bear in mind Don's crazy experience with his client witnessing focus groups. So I'm very careful to be selective about what I share with them. So I don't know if that's what you're talking about, but that's right. What I mean.
Nope. Spot on. Golden rule here of witness prep and focus groups, client never watches, not present, but you are spot on with exactly what I'm talking about, which would be taking, and again, now it's so easy with Zoom, or I have people do it with their iPhones, right? Just pull out their iPhones and do just a quick interview, and then taking that interview and putting it in front of a focus group to say, hey, how credible is this person? Like, what questions would you ask them? Or like you said, like, what's your read? What's your blink? Kind of reaction to this client, and doing it before depo is really the key part. But I know that sometimes it doesn't happen. If you're just now like getting into the Edge and you're reading all the stuff and getting into this, sometimes people come, hey, oh gosh, we didn't do that. I'm like, it's totally okay. You can pick up where you are. You can totally use the template for trial prep, and you can use this like focus group kind of setup for when you get ready for trial. But just like you said, Jenna, find those little, like, what's the little tick, or what are the little things that the focus group people pick up on that maybe you didn't see? Because again, when we spend hours with our clients, like we just kind of forget, like, oh yeah, that might bother some people.
Yeah.
So what are some good examples that you've seen, Jenna, when using kind of focus groups for this?
Well, I actually am thinking of an example where I wish I had done one before. So I'll share with you. And it was interesting because, the defense uses depositions for a lot of different reasons, depositions of your client, I should say. One of those is to see if they're likable, right? Do they come across as authentic, likable? Will a jury believe them, credible, all that stuff? And we were in mediation on a case in December, so a few months ago, and defense said, we don't think a jury's going to like your client. She doesn't come off very warm. She's very kind of sterile and stoic. And I went back and looked at the video and I was like, I get that. And it was interesting because I had never, to me, she's just very matter of fact, which for me personally makes her seem credible. But I kind of was like, that's interesting. So that's where I started to think about incorporating either a focus group or just some like, hey, you got to be yourself, into that. Because it's hard. It's really hard. You get on camera and you become a totally different person. You're not yourself anymore. Especially when you're in a deposition. And I don't know if folks out there are experiencing videotape depths. I'm using that because that's what they do up here. They have been. But you look back at the video of it and you're like, whoa, I thought I was much more personable. I thought I was like laughing and having a great time. And I had RBF the whole time. So that's a time where I wish I had done it a little bit earlier. But to your point, had I, then I could have pointed that out to my client. So and that would be a good example of like, hey, your face looks a little bit sour or whatever. Maybe have some happy thoughts in your mind. And we could have worked on that during witness prep.
Yeah. And that's exactly kind of what we're talking about is where, we get, hey, that looks fine. Like there's nothing really big here. And the focus groups are saying, wow, they're defensive.
Yeah.
Or, wow, they're really confusing or so serious, and it's like, well, because I've also heard, tales of the opposite where it's like, well, they're not taking this serious enough. And it's like, oh my goodness, so of course. But most of the time, we're honing in on what that problematic area is. And I did this recently with a case and it's not here in Texas or it's not Washington either. So, and there were going to be several plaintiffs, right? And they were going to get ready for depositions. All very different people. So this wasn't like a family, right? And they were taking on an institution and they wanted to do focus group. And I said, this may be the best use of your time for focus group is just doing some clips and seeing what people think. And we're talking about asking simple questions. So I've definitely done this before where like the questions get really complicated and I'm like, no. It's like, what's your name? What happened?
Yep.
What's your injury? Like, what's life been like? Like really broad questions because you as an interviewer don't want to play a role in the whole thing, and so helps give really, and that's what we did. We crafted the questions and everyone asked or answered the same question so that when the focus group, and then we had the focus group compare them like, okay, who was the most credible person and who did you like the most and who just didn't make sense. And so we had like a ranking, but they had like, okay, now we know like this person for, witness prep, these are our marching orders. And like, here's where we need to fix this. But also it gave the lawyers like a very big insight into what was in their minds, like what it was in their clients' minds that maybe they hadn't even heard before. And I was like, this is what I'm talking about. Because this happens at deposition all the time. Whoa, I never heard that. Like, and all the time. And in prep, that's why I'm always sitting there thinking like, is this the first time we've heard this? Like,
oh yeah, no, that definitely happened to me where I'm like, or we've gone through the question in prep and I'm like, yeah, they got a banging answer. They're totally going to nail this. And then we get into the deposition and I'm like, you did it. You did awesome. But then you added this weird thing. And I was like, well, why did you add that weird thing? I didn't know about that. And why didn't you tell me? It's just like, cause they get all nervous and flustered. And so that's a great tip is to practice it in front of a focus group beforehand.
Yeah. And I didn't know this oddly. But so I've been trying out ChatGPT just to do some thoughts. And so I asked like, what are ways lawyers use focus groups? And witness prep came up, but it was in a way I'd never even thought of it, which maybe this might have been the old school way I used to do it. Because again, I'm used to, let's use Zoom, or let's create where they bring the client live. And then that's right. I'll bring the client live and have the client like go in front of the focus group and then, tell everything and then leave. I'm like, wow, that seems a little, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that.
You know what? We did that once. This was years ago. I completely forgot about this. We had a sexual harassment client, and we were a little bit concerned about her presentation. She was very rough around the edges, like long criminal history kind of person who had cleaned her life up. But, and we wanted just to see how people would react to that. And we brought her live. It was probably in 2017, maybe 2018. And she was live and she testified. We did her whole testimony in front of a focus group. And then this is key, everybody, make sure they leave for the feedback part. We kicked her out, sent her, I think she went home or had dinner with her mom or something. And then we talked to the focus group about it. So I completely forgot about that.
Okay,
we had done it.
And adversarial groups, I've seen where people bring their client live, versus doing a videotape. But so that makes sense. I mean, I'd never tried it that way because I just thought, well, let's just create a video and play the video. That makes it convenient for everybody. But yeah, I mean, you totally could. But also, like Jenna and I are both saying, like, hey, we're not saying have the client watch the feedback.
Right. Super important, everyone. Super important.
So important. Because, and I always tell people and just try to explain the point of view is they just don't have a way of understanding the feedback in the framework that we do. Like we have the background, we've been doing this, hearing something negative is very normal for us. And they're in one mindset and have had one experience and, throwing all this information at them that this is the way other people think. I mean, it can do all kinds of damage we don't even know about. So,
and actually, interestingly enough, next week we have Andrew Gold, who's going to talk to us about negative focus group responses and what they mean, because that's another thing is, say the focus group says your case sucks, and then your client watches it, they think their case sucks. But what really is that you just didn't present it in the right way, or you need to get some more facts, or whatever it may be. We have the context and the background and experience, as you mentioned, Elizabeth, to say that, to put it into that context and say, oh, our case doesn't suck. We just need more testimony or more this or that. But the client's going to be like, settle my case. We have to get out of this now because the focus group hated me. And that's an emotional response you do not want to have. So,
yeah. And I mean, what I love about focus groups too, and I know we're on kind of a little sidebar, but when you do in a focus groups, you get used to hearing negative feedback. And it's normal, and you don't have a reaction to it, and you don't try to argue with focus groupers, and you start to, okay. And then I'm sure, Andrew, you dig into it, you don't run away from it. So
invite it.
Yeah, exactly. So that'll be a very interesting episode. I'll have to definitely tune in for that one. And one of the things too about doing the focus group feedback too, that I found is in other instances where they say, what that witness said is okay, but do you have anybody else? And it's like, gotcha. Now let's go find some more people to fill in. Or, they're like, they told that story, but I want to make sure like somebody else could, is that really happen? It's like, okay, gotcha. So having a strategy to go get other witnesses or, objective evidence to prove kind of what the client is saying always is a good, helpful thing the focus group will tell you. For sure. And for case framing, like in just kind of themes overall of knowing a lot of times people will say, well, this is the theme of our case. And this is our, this is the hot button. And we go to focus group and they're like, oh, nobody even said that. I'm like,
yeah.
So helping, having, especially when it comes to a damages theme and testing that out. Or, a lot of times when people come to me and they say, I have a very difficult person, and I think we need to make sure, like, if this needs to get settled, I want to know. And that's what we do. And sometimes it works out and that's exactly what that confirms it. And sometimes it's the opposite. And they think, oh, well, I guess I'm just in too deep and I need to take a step back and breathe a little bit because focus group thinks this client's fine.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. I've been there both ways. Been there both
Yes.
ways.
Awesome. So, and again, just to kind of cap off the focus group idea, it's just getting an outside perspective. It's a very short focus group because we're talking about, 10 minutes max of a video clip. And then just doing some quick discussion, or I always like to do a little paper vote. And then moving on, right? If you have another witness or another, other information. So it's very quick. We're not talking about 3 hours. I mean, you could easily get that done in a 20-minute, 30-minute section of the time you have for your focus group. So very quick. But again, just how do we level up, get outside perspective? So,
Right.
The other one is role play. So I know role play is a big part of our template already. We've got a couple of really strong recommendations, which is have somebody else do it. We've got Zoom. We don't really have any really objection to not being able to find someone to help us, even for 30 minutes. But what I've been doing is, because we have so many Zoom depots now, and very rarely are people actually doing anything in person anymore.
Right.
Here, everyone doesn't Zoom, and they're all recorded, is going and finding depositions, taking the video, and then creating a role play with defense counsel's actual questions. Like,
oh, so like clipping the video, so it's like
That's right.
or she is asking it.
That's right.
Oh,
It's a little time consuming, I will tell you.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, because, role play is about giving them a real experience, getting the real pressure in there, and so we have so many of these Zoom depots, and it happened that I was helping somebody get ready, and I said, and had already been, 3 or 4 depots in the case, right? So we have 3 or 4 depots that I can make clips from. And so that's what I did, is I just kind of took them and spliced together. And it ended up not being a very long video. I think I had 2 videos, each of them were 10 minutes, but it's the question, and then there's a pause to give your client, and then the next one. And the nice thing is, again, it's their words, it's the tone, all these things that bring it to the next level for them to make it real. And then you're able to pause, and then you say, okay, let's try that one again. Replay and go forward. But what the feedback that I've gotten from folks that we've done this with is nailed it. I already knew exactly what that tone was going to be. I had that feeling of getting that next question of what else, and knowing I could just say, that's it for now. And so the feedback has been really positive from the clients of feeling way more prepared, having gone through that experience with that role play.
I love that. That is something that never occurred to me. I mean, half the time I don't even order the video after I get I'll have an E-train at the transcript and do you want the video? Not right now. I mean, that's so creative. And because it's we can craft a question we know that they're going to ask, or we think they're going to ask, well, tell me what happened, but we don't know the tone. We don't know the wording. I mean, I have one defense counsel right now who his questions are paragraphs. I mean, they're just confusing and long. And, the way he asks them is he doesn't specify what he's talking about. So witnesses have gotten confused as to place and time and person. And so to have somebody be able to actually practice with his weird questions would be fantastic. I mean, great idea.
And you could just grab a transcript like you're saying and just filter those questions and create, and I've definitely done that before, and have the exact wording. But it's so hard sometimes to recreate that tone, especially if they have a real specific style, like you're saying, and which most of them do.
Yeah.
And I used to have, a role play question list that was kind of insurance defense's greatest hits.
Yeah.
Same questions you're going to get over and over again. But there's always sometimes that little twist, that little extra little question that they ask that on paper it looks okay, but with their tone, it's it gets real personal and people get super offended, which anybody would. But, that's kind of the thought behind it was, okay, we have this available. We have this resource of this video. Why not use it? Now, it does take a little bit of time, but the beauty of it is you don't have to find the worst questions. You don't have to it's just to give them an idea of the tone and the pace and how that question's coming out. And I'm always amazed at when I read a transcript and then watch the video, and it's completely different. Because, I appreciate court reporters, but there's so much difference. Like, for example, this case was employment law, and this defense counsel is very straightforward, very patient, and she uses silence. So, in the transcript, it doesn't look like someone's running on and on and on, but listening to the video, it's like she asks a very simple question. It's like, yes, well, because blah, 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 blah. And this, that, and the other. And yeah, but nobody else ever had that happen to them. And she's just eating it up, with that silence, just letting him run on. And you can't see that in a transcript, but it was just like, okay. And so this is really helpful when you're getting ready for trial, because making them watch their video depo is pretty painful, for them. But clipping it out and then having them re-answer those questions that hey, these are the target areas is another great way to use this for trial if you don't have a chance to do it for deposition. All that to be said, if you're on Zoom, record the dang thing. And if the court reporter says, we're going to charge you $250, say, no, you're not. I'm recorded on my computer, and I'm literally just, here I go. Oh, I'm hitting the button.
Yep, just tell everybody you're doing it. And those in Washington, I think it's CR 30B8 or something like that. It allows anybody to record it. So you don't have to hire a videographer. I don't know. You know what I've never thought about as I'm saying this, though, is if there is a videographer present, could you also record and just have your own free copy? Or I don't know, that might not be kosher. I've never thought about that, but it just occurred to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little hairy down here with kind of all that kind of stuff. And most of the time, videographer wants to make sure that they get paid.
So
Again, if you don't, and it's all like, oh, well, who ordered it and who didn't? And so it can get a little hairy, but I always say, hey, if that's something you want to do, just like in anything we do, let people know ahead of time, because if you do it last minute, it ruffles everyone's feathers, right? It ruffles the judge's feather when you do that. It ruffles the court reporter, defense counsel. So
yeah, and I think one thing that might be worth considering for everyone, if you want to use this technique, and I hope that people do use it, is maybe having some ground rules. I know that David Wiley and those folks down there, Amy Gibson and such, they do kind of like a ground rules discussion with defense counsel ahead of time about things. That might be something that you add in, like, hey, if I want to record a deposition just for my internal purposes, then we're going to be okay with that. And it's just going to be on the Zoom, and it's just going to be the record button here. And if you want a copy of it, I'm certainly happy to give it to you. I mean, that has worked for me in the past. When I've just been open about it and said, are you fine with me recording this? For the most part, they are. Out-of-state counsel gets a little funky with it, but even though I have had some out-of-state counsel be okay with it, but yeah, just put it out there and use it for what you can.
Right. And most of the time people don't care. And the biggest pushback that I've seen is people say, well, I don't want to be on camera. I'm like, that's fine. Yeah, I can actually pin the video, and it's just going to be of the witness. Like, oh, okay. So most of the time, I think it's just a matter of thinking ahead and saying, like, okay, hey, we're gonna video, or we want a copy of it, or whatever it may be. But and most of the time, well, I'll say most of the time, that could be totally wrong. Defense will video record your client automatically. So for trial, you've got a nugget you can use for trial prep. But one of the things too that I also thought was super helpful was if you are using obviously a deposition of another client or another witness, and that witness does not do a good job answering, it's a great way to say, have your client answer the video and then say, okay, I want you to listen to this example, and then have them play it and then say, what do you think? And then say, hey, this is an example of a bad way to go.
Okay.
So it
Right,
gives
wrong way,
another,
no.
yeah, it just gives another look at like, oh, okay. Because so many people that I talk to, oh, well, I went on YouTube and I watched a video of like how to do a deposition, or, you know, I watched, you know, there's, oh my gosh, Donald Trump's video. I watched Justin Bieber's. I watched, you know, like, there's all kinds of really terrible ones to watch. If you're bored, like, please go watch them. But I've just had people tell me like, yeah, oh no, I went online and looked some stuff up and watched a video. And I'm like, what did you watch?
Yeah, what did you want? Or like, I read an article about it, or you know, this, I think I'm ready to go. Am I supposed to do this, that, or the other? And I'm like, no. Just like, forget all that.
That's right. Wash your brain. That was wrong.
Yep.
Let's go this way.
Sorry you wasted your time, but
Yeah. I appreciate you being proactive. However, yeah, that definitely ask people what they've been looking at, because now with so much information at your tips, and hey, they could go ask Chat GPT. Like,
yes, they could.
how do you prepare for a deposition? I'm going to go do that and see what they say. So, all right. So let's move on to the last point, which is one that I think people use already, or maybe you're dipping your toe in the water with it, because one of the steps that in the 7 steps of the template is to craft, organize people's facts and truths. And, you know, there's a great visual aid for that, like how to get people visually involved, like how they can see the organization of it. But that's kind of the only place in the template that we use a visual aid. And so that's going to, like, my last tip is be using some form of a visual aid to teach your clients every single session. I have seen people come in and they have no idea what the damages claims are. And we literally just take a giant notepad and write it up there. And so they know, I'm like, this is your target. This is your, this is your arena here. And they're like, oh, okay. You know, because sometimes they may have seen the lawsuit, but that's been a year and a half ago. And did they really read it? Probably not. Yeah. But that's an easy one, you know, visual aid wise. But, you know, in focus groups have really confirmed this for me, which is people learn so much faster, so much quicker when you pair it with a visual aid. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Like, it can be something really simple or something you guys create together. But I have found that people's memory and retention from prep into their deposition is almost 10x when we do just a couple exercises with a giant notepad, or if you're on Zoom, you know, with the whiteboard, or, you know, with, you know, creating something in Word. And it really does help them learn it faster. They retain it for deposition, and they just do a better job. And you can know that you can spend less time hammering it, because a lot of times we get in there and we just think it's like we got to repeat. But when you pair things together with the visual aid, you're going to find that people are going to retain it quicker, and you can move on to the next thing, because we want, as lawyers, to use time as efficiently as possible, right? The major pushback I always get about doing witness prep is I don't have time. Yeah. How am I supposed to meet with somebody for 3 days? And I'm like, please don't. Okay. Like, you might kill each other if you did that. But it's using that time efficiently and that's why, you know, having the steps is essential, but being able to speed those, like have that retention go faster and be able to condense it down is going to make it easier for you. Or, like, you know, what I always encourage people to do is, like, have a warm up, you know, have a 30-minute, 20-minute Zoom warm up where you're just, hey, this is what we're going to be doing. Just talk, you know, hey, walk us through that, just to get them kind of warmed up. Because once you give them that warm up and you give them what we're going to be doing, it stops I'm going to go to YouTube because my lawyer hasn't told me anything. It prevents that weird letter that some lawyers still send out that says, hey, don't offer any information, answer yes or no. Like,
tell the truth.
Tell the truth. Oh my gosh. Like, that's obvious. Like, it drives me crazy. I mean, Jenna, these articles, these videos, the number one thing says, tell the truth. Hey, guess what? That's like teaching a kid to tie their shoes. Like, here's the laces. Like, it's already obvious that they're going to tell the truth. Like, we all know that. So why are we like, it's, I went like, people are befuddled. They're like, well, I got that. Like, it's a little more complicated, I think. I'm like, yes, it is.
It's like, what things can I say? For example, the truth might be that you don't know. So you want to say that truth, the real truth of I don't know, instead of trying to make something up in your mind. It's okay to say, I don't know. You know, little tidbits of advice in that direction are totally fine. But I mean, I will say one thing I remind, not usually my client, but any lay witness I talk to, I'll be like, just remember you're under oath. And that's the same oath you'd have in court, right? So just
perfect.
Keep that in mind, right? People, okay, I know you want to help your friend, your family member, whoever it is, but we're not here to help. We're here to tell the truth, stuff, which should be helpful, but not in any sort of like prefabricated or made up way. So
right. And that's exactly a very good distinction. Like we're 100% talking about clients, like and getting them ready and the stuff that's out there. And that's why like having a quick 30-minute, like, hey, and that really eases their minds and also gets them started thinking, right? Their brain is going to start thinking about, okay, what are my concerns? Like, okay, we're going to talk about this, like stories. All right. And then the brain just starts working on it. Mm-hmm. Right. Without them devoting any, conscious effort into it. So then when you get in, there's not going to be a total deer in the headlights. I didn't do anything. Hey, by the way, I've got to go an hour early. Mm-hmm. Like, they're pretty well like, okay, I know what we're going to do. We're going to get in there. And so, that's just a little, that's something that I've changed, it's just adding that warm up. That intro, that warm up meeting, just to get a good feel of kind of for them to kind of start setting expectations about time, beyond an email or a phone call. Hey, we're meeting at this time, bring your list of concerns. Mm-hmm. That's great. But, having that extra warm up, I think always helps people. And people are more likely to give you their time when you tell them what you're going to be doing, for sure. So, but anyhow, with our visual aids, just to kind of cap off on that, anything you can draw a line and do a timeline. You can write up, stories or places where things have changed. You can divide a page in half and before and after, right? I mean, it does not have to be super creative, but what you will find is some people have no idea how their injury works. They have never seen their MRI. And so, hey, sweet, I can go get an MRI off YouTube, or I can go get, whatever it is to kind of help show them so that they understand a little bit better. Because that then will connect up with, oh, that's why like all these symptoms or all these things I can't do. And it's like, oh, okay. So a visual aid in that sense is always helpful as well. Even if you just got to go through the pictures of the car, it's getting people engaged on another level with their brain, is always going to keep you, the information flowing and people paying attention as well, especially if you're doing it on Zoom. It always really helps to be able to break it up that way. So
I would say the worst historian about damages is going to be the person who's damaged. It's just, they don't really, they may feel the damage, they may experience it every single day, but it's become their norm. So how do you reinvigorate what those damages are and how much of an impact they're having on their life? A visual aid is an excellent way of doing that. And in fact, I don't know if you've watched the witness prep videos. I'm not going to get into them, but there's one example that Don does with a client, and involves medications. And he says, well, how much medication do you take every day? And the client kind of lists a bunch of different things. It doesn't sound like a lot when he's saying it, and he doesn't think that it's a lot. And then Don brings out these bottles of pills, and there's like 5 or 6 bottles of pills, and they're like ginormous. And it's like, this is how much you've taken over the past 3 years since your crash. Like, do you understand? It's not just like, oh, I take a pain pill here and there, or I take a this or that. This is how much junk you've been shoving into your body because of what this person did. So that's an example of doing exactly what you said, Elizabeth, of visualizing it. so that they can really internalize that impact and reinvigorate, the feeling of, oh my gosh, I have been impacted by this.
Exactly. And even if it's as simple as writing it up on a piece of paper, they don't do that for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the sequence of how I kind of like to do it is we do a visual aid of a medical timeline, and it's just what they remember. Now, if there's significant things they forgot, we tick it on there for them as well. And then we go over to, what's changed, what's different, how's this impacted you? And it's like, oh, well, and I'm like, hey, I got 3 years of treatment over here. You cannot ignore that. We just put it up now. Tell me, and you start to lay it out, and it's almost inevitable when I do it that way that people, they get through it and they kind of tear up because they're just like, I didn't know, like, I didn't realize like how much I've changed. And like, I just kind of started accepting it and, just like, oh.
Yeah. Well, like doctor's appointments is a really good one. As I'm thinking of different examples, like have a calendar, which we use these for trial, right? These are just regular kind of trial examples of visuals, but this could work great for witness prep as well. If you have a calendar of how many times did you used to go to the doctor, of just once a year for my annual. And then, I had a prescription for one thing, so I'd have to go every 6 months. Okay, well, here's that on a calendar. Now you go to the doctor every week and, you've had 3 surgeries. And so you put that on the calendar and you show them, because going to the doctor has become a part of their life. Now they don't even notice it anymore. It's like they've become numb to it. It's just part of everyday life. So to see it, the before and after difference of how much time they're spending doing this thing that they could be spending with family or on their job or their passion or with their dog or whatever, is huge. So that kind of, great idea. Great idea. Now I'm like thinking of all these ways I can use these things, writing down notes and whatnot.
Yeah. And I will say, you do need as a lawyer to sit down before they come in and kind of have some of this stuff ready to go. Like, so even like the calendar, or even if it's like, okay, so we do a metachronology, where I'm like, okay, well, that's cool, but that doesn't necessarily, like, if you sit down and go through with the client, that's just not the same thing as creating a timeline. Now you've got it fresh in your mind. They're kind of do. So you're able to kind of tick things off, like I said, but let's say like you've got somebody like you described, Jenna, who, basically March, 6 visits, February, 8 visits. And then how many days are there in February 28? So you're going there, like, oh, like just having the quantity and the amount, and it really does, like, oh, wow. Cause they don't learn it that way. Like you said, they learn it one day at a time, one appointment at a time. Or the big marks, like, oh, I was able to walk again, the surgery, the cast came off and, I was able to walk. It's like, okay, cool. But, let's go back to some of these other periods of time. And that also helps too, when you do that medical timeline and then you go next to the damage, you say, okay, well, who's helping you? Like you're in the hospital or you're in the surgery. So who's taking care of the dog and who's taking the trash out? And they're like, oh yeah, somebody got to do that. I'm like, yeah. So it's like getting those wheels turning and getting them refreshed, because like the last thing you ever want is like somebody to go in to a deposition and defense counsel knows they haven't been refreshed. And it's just kind of like, they skip over all that. It's just like, well, how are you now? And they're like, oh, I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm fine. Good days, bad days. And you're like, oh my gosh, like you're killing me small. So, and that also, like when it's up on the wall and you're going through role play and then they fall for that trick, you go and you're like, are you kidding me? It's right here. Like, you can't ignore the black and white on the paper. So it really does help those folks that are stuck, those folks that are stoic. Some people who are forgetful, not because of TBI, but because they're forgetful, or they've just got a long time to cover. I know a lot of cases have been backlogged and jammed, and they're 6 years old, they're 8 years old, they're 5 years old. And it's like, okay, we got to go back in time. How can we efficiently do this without putting us both to sleep? So that always helps. So those are my 3 main kind of, how do we level up, how to make it better for us, make it better for them, our clients, and, always a strong proponent of anything that we do in a deposition to have clear, confident testimony of our clients is going to go, exponentially increase the value of the case. So I hope that was helpful.
That's been super helpful. I wanted to mention just 2 points for those folks who are listening about what you mentioned. Number one is just the word damages. Make sure that that's on your visuals, or at least you have that conversation with your client, because this hits on a couple of points we made. Number one, the language and the tone the defense is going to use. And then also remembering what to talk about in damages, because if the first time your client is hearing the word damages is during the deposition of like, hey, what are your damages? They might be like, I don't know, like my car, like
that's right. My bumper was damaged.
What do you mean damages, right? And I've had that happen where I've been like, okay, the defense is going to ask you about your damages. So what are you going to say? And my client's like, I don't know what that means, because they expect to hear what are your injuries or what are your, so just a little, maybe throw that up as a, in your visuals and whatnot, just to show them that all of these things are damages, right? That's the question when you are asked it. These are the things that you answer with, that sort of thing. And then the other thing with, when you mentioned having like a prep meeting or like an ease into it, one thing, and I don't know if you've done this, but one thing that I've started doing is putting, we all want to put together a plaintiff bio or a client bio or client, what's the other thing that we call it? Client bio is the thing. I think that Hoey's blog article specifically calls it. So that's what I'm going to say. But I use that. That is something where your client is just talking about themselves the whole time. You're just asking them questions about their childhood and, all the things, just to kind of get to know who they are. And, if we're doing it the right way, which I'm guilty of not, you do that kind of early on. Sometimes I don't. So right before witness prep, it's a great way to like form a bond with your client and establish kind of a trust relationship. And then when you go into like preparing for them for this witness stuff, they're like, oh, it's another, my client bio meetings can last anywhere between 1 and 2 hours. And so they're like, oh yeah, 4 hours with you. It's totally fine. I've kind of been there before. Couple days. All right. I understand. It's going to actually take a long time. So that just occurred to me it's not really, it kind of is a tip for witness prep. It's to kind of like, warm them up a little bit. Just make them know that you're there for them and want to know about them. And then they'll feel comfortable spending like a whole day with you, versus if they've only ever had a few minute conversations with you, they might be like, oh, what are we going to talk about?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well,
I don't know what you've done with that, Elizabeth.
I mean, having that bonding before you get into witness prep helps so tremendously, because they know how important they are to you. And that's what people need to know. It's like, I'm important and my case is important. And sometimes it's hard to see that because they have one side that they see, which is, emails telling them, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing here? Or phone calls. How are you? How are you? How are you? And then, we're over here doing something completely different and working up all this stuff. Well, they don't necessarily see that. So, I mean, I think that is super helpful. And I think, playing back to Amy Gibson and David Wiley, they do a study hall. They have employment law. So they have a study hall where they get together and they just go through documents. There's no pressure with it. It's just refreshing. And then then they have switch modes to witness prep mode.
Okay. Oh, that's a great idea too.
Employment law has so many documents, and they're going to be asked about what's in their file. So it's like, okay, we got, versus personal injury, my mantra is we're not going to go through every medical record. That's a waste of your time and my time. And let's just, do a timeline. So, awesome. All good points. But yeah, those are my top 3 things. If we're, things that I've kind of changed or little extras that I've been doing, just to figure out a way to keep people getting better.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us, Elizabeth. And we have a nice little comment from an audience member, John Christopher. He says, Elizabeth, I always learn from your presentation, and today is no exception. You are among the best edge lawyers. So,
well, that's a very nice thing to say. I appreciate that comment.
Yeah, it's always nice to hear that your time is impacting others and what you have to say is making a difference. So Thank you again for being here with us, Elizabeth, this week. And thank you to all of you who joined us live for this week's episode of Fridays with Keenan's Cutting Edge. If you liked the episode, please give us a thumbs up to feed that YouTube algorithm. Let them know that you love hearing from us and find the content interesting. And then don't forget to subscribe and sign up for alerts so you don't miss an episode. Next week, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have Andrew Gold with us. He is a former fellow of Don Keenan. And in fact, I think he was the fellow when I got started in all of this back in maybe 2017, 2018. So he's been a long time KTI person, and I'm excited to have him on to talk about focus group responses, in particular, those ones that you think are negative or seem to perceive as negative. And so I'm very excited to hear about that, tips on how to absorb that information, get into it, interpret it, and how to communicate it to your client. So I'm looking forward to having Andrew next week. Thanks again for being here this week with us. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you next time.